Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The sun rose lazily over the bustling streets of ABA, its golden rays glinting off the rusted rooftops and cracked pavements. Chisholm's bare feet moved quickly, stepping around puddles from last night's rain as she balanced her tray of bread on her head. Her wrapper was faded, her blouse loose and torn at one sleeve, but her spirit was fierce. Every morning followed the same routine: wake before dawn, help her mother take medication, say a silent prayer, and head out into the chaos of the market. She had only a dozen loaves today, bought on credit from the bakery. If she sold them all, she would barely make enough to feed herself and pay back her debt. Yet, as she pushed forward, determined and graceful, there was kindness written on her face, a kind of softness life hadn't managed to take away. That morning, however, something felt different. Near the hospital entrance, where she usually paused to rest, she spotted a small figure sitting on the cold pavement. A blind boy, perhaps 6 or 7, was holding a stick as a walking cane, his head bowed and legs drawn up. He wore a shirt too big for him, with buttons missing and trousers that barely reached his ankles. His eyes, clouded and pale, stared into a world he could not see. Chisholm's heart clenched. The boy looked hungry, desperately so. She crouched beside him and gently tapped his shoulder. He flinched but didn't run. "Now, are you hungry?" she asked softly. He nodded slowly. Without thinking, she tore a loaf of bread in half, wrapped it in one of her spare wrappers, and handed it to him. The boy's tiny hands trembled as he took the food, and as he chewed, a small, grateful smile formed on his lips. "Thank you," he whispered. That was the moment something deep shifted in her life, though she didn't know it yet. Chisholm didn't even think about how she'd now have less to sell. She simply smiled at the boy and sat with him for a few minutes, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. He didn't talk much, only said his name was Tobe, and that someone would come for him later. But those few minutes felt like a lifetime. When she finally stood up to leave, she had no idea that someone had seen everything from the back seat of a black-tinted SUV parked across the road. A man in a dark suit sat silently, observing the bread seller who had just given food to a blind child like it was nothing. That man was Naji, one of the richest and most feared men in the region. And the boy, unknown to Chisholm, was the son she believed she had lost forever. The next morning, Chisholm returned to the hospital entrance, her tray a little heavier than usual. Something inside her hoped she would see the boy again. And there he was, sitting in the same spot, legs crossed, back to the wall, his head raised as though listening for something only he could hear. Chisholm's heart leaped. She hurried over and greeted him. His smile lit up as soon as he heard her voice. "You came back," he whispered. She knelt and placed a fresh loaf into his hands. "Of course. I told you we're friends now," she replied. That morning, they shared not just bread, but laughter. Chisholm sang for him again, and he asked if she could describe what the sky looked like. With words rich in imagination, she painted a picture of clouds and colors, and he smiled as if he could see them himself. From that day on, feeding Tobe became a silent routine. Chisholm would pass by before the heat of the sun became unbearable, share bread, talk with him, and continue her rounds. She noticed he was always clean, even if his clothes were old. Someone was caring for him, yet it was clear he was emotionally neglected. He rarely spoke of home or family. "I'd just stay somewhere big," he once said. "But it's lonely." Those words stayed with her. He began to call her Auntie Bread. She laughed every time. Their bond grew fast, strong like ropes woven from unseen kindness. To her, he was a child in need. To him, she was a voice of comfort in a world of darkness. What neither of them realized was that someone was watching every encounter, studying Chisholm with increasing interest. Hidden behind tinted glass and guarded silence, Naji watched the woman he had once loved and destroyed feed his adopted blind son with tenderness he had never been able to give. He did not yet recognize her as Chisholm, the woman he humiliated and abandoned years ago. She had changed, thinner, harder, matured by suffering, but her voice still carried that same unexplainable peace. Ease had always believed his son was adopted after a failed pregnancy scandal with a past lover. He never imagined the woman his son now clung to was the very one whose life he shattered. But something about her stirred old memories, and though his heart was armored by pride, a crack was forming. Ease Naji was a man carved from marble, cold, powerful, and unshakable. The CEO of Naji Holdings, he sat atop a business empire built on real estate, oil, and political alliances. He was feared more than respected. Few ever saw the real man behind the suit, a man haunted by one past mistake. Years ago, he had loved a woman. Her name was Chisholm. But when she came to him pregnant, his mother and fiancé convinced him it was a trap. Angry and embarrassed, he shamed her in front of staff, calling her a liar and a gold digger. Days later, he heard she had miscarried. He closed that chapter and never looked back until now. Every morning, he found himself watching security footage of the hospital gates. His driver thought it strange. His guards thought it foolish. But Ease couldn't stop. He watched the bread seller walk in dusty slippers, carrying her tray, her smile tired but warm. He watched her bend to feed Tobe, laugh with him, brush dirt from his shirt, and sing softly. She never asked who he was. She never looked around for a reward. There was something deeply unsettling about her silence. His fiancée, Amarachi, had started noticing his distraction. She once peeked at the footage and scoffed. "Just a hungry girl feeding another hungry child," she said. But Ease didn't reply. There was something about the way the boy lit up in her presence, a joy no nanny or housekeeper had ever brought him. It gnawed at Ease's soul. That week, he sent one of his private investigators to find out more about the bread seller. The results came back incomplete. No fixed address, no bank account, no family records. She lived in a shanty on the edge of ABA, caring for a sick mother. That's when it hit him like thunder. The face, the voice, the name. Chisholm Ijeoma Okafor. The woman he once destroyed. The woman he never forgave himself for abandoning. She was back, and fate had led her to unknowingly love the very child he adopted to fill the void she left behind. The irony was cruel. And for the first time in years, Ease Naji, a man who feared nothing, was afraid. Ease Naji stood in the center of his marble-floored living room, gazing at nothing, yet seeing everything. His mansion echoed with silence, save for the distant hum of the air conditioning and the occasional chirp from the birds outside. But inside him, an old storm was awakening. When his mother, Chief Madam Veronica Naji, walked in with her usual elegance, wrapped in expensive lace and judgment, she noticed the troubled look on his face. "Is there a problem?" she asked, not out of concern but control. Ease hesitated before telling her about the bread seller. At the mention of the woman's name, Chisholm Ijeoma, her mood changed instantly. Her brows furrowed, her lips tightened. "That one? That lowly thing you almost threw away your future for? You're not seriously letting her distract you again?" Ease remained silent, and in that silence, his mother's fear grew. Veronica had worked hard to cover the scandal of the past. She had bribed hospital staff, fabricated test results, and used Amarachi's influence to push Chisholm out. That chapter, she believed, had been buried forever. But the past, it seemed, had claws. Ease returned to his private study and locked the door. He pulled out a photo album that hadn't been touched in 7 years. The pictures were faded, but one in particular held him captive. Chisholm smiling at a beachside picnic they'd once shared in Enugu, holding a flower crown he made for her. She had been bright, unspoiled by the world, gentle in the way few women were. And she had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. The moment she told him she was pregnant, he had felt a flicker of fear, but also a strange hope. It was his mother's harsh intervention and Amarachi's clever lies that turned that hope into rage. The DNA test, now he remembered, had always seemed rushed. Chisholm had cried, begged, even offered to do another test, but Ease's pride refused. He believed what was convenient, that she lied to trap him, that she faked the pregnancy for money. He had destroyed her in front of his staff, thrown money at her like a beggar, and told her to vanish. She did. And now, all these years later, he was watching her feed a boy he thought was just an adopted child. And suddenly he couldn't breathe. The past didn't whisper anymore. It screamed. The more Ease watched Chisholm and Tobe from afar, the more his soul cracked. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, but for the first time in years, he didn't listen. He thought of all the women he had dated since. None had Chisholm's soul. None stayed when things were hard. And Amarachi? She was elegant, yes, but her heart was cold. She cared more about her reputation than the boy he had brought into their home. Even with all her expensive perfumes, she never once made Tobe smile. Not like Chisholm. Watching that little boy cling to Chisholm's wrapper, giggling at her silly songs, something hit him hard. Tobe wasn't just a blind boy who needed love. He was his second chance to make things right. But fate was cruel, and Ease didn't know it yet, but the truth waiting to come out would soon turn his world inside out. Amarachi stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her gold necklace, her brows furrowed in growing irritation. She had noticed the change in Ease, his long silences, his secretive phone calls, and most of all, the way he no longer looked at her the same way. She prided herself on being the perfect woman for a man like him. Refined, well-connected, and ruthless when needed. Yet lately, she felt like a shadow in his home. When she first saw the footage of the bread seller, barefoot, dark-skinned, her clothes clinging to her sweat-streaked body, she laughed. A beggar, she scoffed. What on earth is he watching this for? But laughter turned to fear as days passed and Ease's obsession with a mystery woman deepened. When she saw the boy, Tobe, smiling at the woman like she was the sun, Amarachi felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Insecurity. That woman had something she didn't. A real connection. And Amarachi knew exactly how to destroy it. She hired a private investigator behind Ease's back, slipping him an envelope of cash. I want to know who that girl is, she said. Where she lives, who she talks to, everything. In 2 days, the report came back. Chisholm Ijeoma Okafor, once a bright university student, had vanished after a scandal with Ease Naji 7 years ago. Her father had died of hypertension shortly after the scandal, and her sick mother now lived in a one-room zinc shack on the edge of the city. Amarachi was stunned. So it's her, she whispered. The one from back then? Suddenly, everything made sense. The guilt in Ease's eyes, the silence, the strange protectiveness over Tobe. Amarachi realized she was standing on a powder keg, and Chisholm was the spark. But Amarachi didn't panic. She planned. If Chisholm had returned to ruin her place in Ease's world, she'd pay the price. Amarachi would not allow a woman from the gutter to rise again. She paid a corrupt street officer carefully orchestrated whispers, and within a week, the rumors spread like wildfire that a bread seller was trying to poison a billionaire's son, pretending to be kind for money. Amarachi didn't need proof, just chaos. One morning, as Chisholm approached the hospital gate, a police van arrived. They handcuffed her roughly in front of passers-by and accused her of attempting to kidnap and poison a minor. Tobe cried, reaching blindly for her, but they pushed her away. People watched, some recording, others laughing. Chisholm screamed her innocence, but no one listened. Amarachi watched from her car nearby, smiling coldly. She knew Ease would be furious, but confused. And confusion was the first step to control. All she needed now was for Chisholm to disappear for good. It was a rainy evening when the nurse, Miss Ijeoma, stood in the hospital laboratory, staring at the DNA report in her hands. She had been the one on duty when Chisholm donated blood for a street patient weeks earlier. What no one knew was that she had quietly run a comparative test using Tobe's hospital files. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't even ethical. But something about Chisholm's voice when she called the boy my child during a moment of panic had moved her. And now the truth was in front of her, printed in black and white. A 99.98% maternal match. Chisholm was Tobe's biological mother. Miss Ijeoma sat down, breath stolen. How was this possible? Tobe was adopted under the name Tokchukwu Ease Naji from an anonymous birth file. No one had ever traced his real parents. Yet here was the answer. His real mother had unknowingly found him through fate, not law. The nurse debated for days about what to do. Should she go to ease Naji? Would he believe her? Would she be risking her job, or worse, her life? The Naji name carried weight and danger. But as she saw the news of Chisholm's public arrest flash across her phone screen, something in her broke. That woman did not deserve this. So, late one evening, Miss Ijeoma wore a hoodie, tucked the report in her purse, and made her way to Naji Estate. She was nearly turned away by the guards until she showed her hospital ID and insisted it was urgent. She sat in the billionaire's private study, her hands shaking as she passed the folder across the table. Ease didn't speak as he opened it. He read the result once. Then again. His hands trembled, lips parted. The woman he had cast aside was not just feeding his son. She had given birth to him. Tobe wasn't adopted. He was his child. And Ease's world shattered. The air grew cold. Regret surged through his chest like poison. How could he have missed this? How many years had he wasted? And worse, how much pain had he caused? He had stolen a mother from her child. He had punished an innocent woman based on lies. And he had stood by silently while she was arrested for trying to love the very boy she had brought into the world. Ease dropped the folder and leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. God, what have I done? The nurse didn't say a word. She simply stood, bowed slightly, and walked out. The damage had been done. Now, the truth would have to speak louder than silence. And for the first time in years, the man who controlled everything felt completely powerless. The silence in Ease's private study lingered, like a haunting echo, after the nurse left. The DNA report remained on the desk, but its truth had already begun to consume him. For hours, Ease sat there unblinking, staring at nothing, while the weight of realization pressed on his chest. Chisholm, the woman he had accused of deception, humiliated in public, and cast aside as trash, was the mother of the only child he had ever loved. Not only that, but the boy he thought had been adopted as a replacement for the child he believed she lied about was in fact that very same child. It was as if life had played a cruel trick, wrapping his shame in irony and serving it cold. Ease rubbed his hands over his face as if trying to erase the years, erase the damage, erase the guilt. But the truth was now written in blood, and nothing could change that. He picked up the file again, rereading the details. Chisholm Ijeoma Okafor, maternal match 99.98%. He flipped through the hospital records and realized that the child had been listed as abandoned. How had it happened? He remembered Amarachi's urgency years ago, how she pushed him to move on quickly, to forget the scandal for the sake of his reputation. And then the mysterious broker who helped him adopt Tobe, how everything had been done in secrecy, with little questioning. It now all made sense. He had unknowingly adopted his own son, lost through a conspiracy of lies, fear, and pride. And worse still, when that child found his way back to his mother, guided by something deeper than sight, Ease had allowed her to be dragged through the mud. The arrest, the humiliation. He had watched it unfold and said nothing. Not because he was cruel, but because he didn't know. And now he did. And it was too late to unsee. The worst part wasn't even the realization of what he had done to Chisholm. It was the memory of her silence. She had never come demanding answers. She had not sought revenge or compensation. She had simply fed her son out of kindness, not even knowing he belonged to her. And when trouble came, she faced it alone. Ease slammed his fist against the table, startling his assistant outside the door. He wanted to scream, to tear down the walls, to find Amarachi and confront her. But above all, he wanted to see Chisholm. Not to beg for forgiveness yet, he didn't deserve it, but to tell her the truth, to acknowledge the wrong, to look into her eyes, knowing now the depth of what she had survived, and say the words he had buried for years. I was wrong. Chisholm had never felt fear quite like that before, not even on the day she had been thrown out of her university hostel with nothing but a plastic bag and swollen eyes. She had just finished sharing half of her last loaf with Tobe that morning when two uniformed officers approached her near the hospital. At first, she thought it was a mistake. They asked her name. She answered. Then came the accusations: attempted kidnapping, attempted poisoning, suspicion of using the child for sympathy to extort the public. Her jaw dropped. Her tray hit the floor, the remaining loaves scattering into the dust. Before she could process what was happening, rough hands gripped her arms and dragged her toward the van. A crowd gathered. Someone shouted, "That's the girl. The one who pretends to care." Phones came out. Videos began. Chisholm's mouth opened to speak, but no words came. Not even cries. Just silence. The kind that feels like drowning. Tobe screamed. He had been standing a few steps away, his tiny hands clinging to her scarf. When the officers yanked her away, he cried louder, stumbling forward, waving his stick helplessly. "Auntie Bread! Auntie Bread! Where are you?" His screams pierced her heart like a blade. Chisholm struggled against the officers, begging them to let her calm him. "Please, let me hold him, just for 1 second. He doesn't understand." But they pushed her into the van, slammed the door, and left the boy weeping in the middle of the street. Onlookers either watched in pity or indifference. No one helped. Chisholm sat on the cold metal floor of the police van, shaking. She had faced hunger. She had faced heartbreak. But this? Being treated like a criminal for showing love? This was a wound deeper than all the rest. At the mansion, Ease received a call from one of his junior guards. "Sir, they've arrested the bread seller," he said flatly. Ease's heart stopped. "What?" "Yes, sir." Apparently, it was Amarachi's order. Something about her being a threat. Ease dropped his phone. Rage surged through him like fire. He rushed to his car, barked at his driver, and gave one command: "Find her. Now." As the car sped through the city, Ease's mind raced. He didn't know what he would say when he saw Chisholm. He didn't know if she would even speak to him. But he knew this. The woman he once discarded was now the only person whose dignity mattered. He had let her suffer again. He had stood in silence while she was dragged. That silence had cost him more than pride. It had cost him a mother's peace. And now he would fix it. Or at least try. Chisholm sat on the cracked bench in the dimly lit police cell, her wrapper torn, her arms bruised, and her spirit clinging to its last strand of hope. She didn't cry. Not because she didn't want to, but because she had learned long ago that tears didn't change the world. They only made people feel sorry for a moment before they walked away. She thought of her mother, alone at home, waiting for the medicine she was supposed to buy. She thought of Tobe, his little hands reaching out, his voice calling for her, his tears. That was what broke her. Not the handcuffs, not the cell, but the sound of that child screaming for her, and knowing he would be alone again. And for what? For bread? For kindness? Was the world so blind it couldn't see the difference between love and crime? Outside, reporters gathered. The story had gone viral. Bread seller arrested for attempted kidnap of blind billionaire son. Amarachi had made sure the headlines were ugly and loud. Ease watched from his office, fists clenched, heart thundering. He had power. He had money. Yet, in this moment, he felt helpless. He saw the footage of Chisholm being pushed into the van. He heard the boy's voice crack in pain. And he realized that his silence, his hesitation, had allowed this cruelty. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. Not just of Chisholm, but of Tobe, the boy who had found his way to his real mother, and who was now left weeping in the dark. Ease entered the police station with fire in his eyes. He didn't need introductions. The officers stood up, stammering apologies. "Where is she?" he barked. They led him to the cell. The moment he saw her sitting on the bench, head bowed, something inside him shattered. This wasn't the strong, smiling woman he had been watching for weeks. This was a mother in chains. A woman crushed beneath a world that never gave her a chance. Chisholm looked up, her eyes meeting his, filled with a quiet storm. Ease opened his mouth to speak, but she looked away. And in that moment, he felt the full weight of his silence. Not just for the arrest, but for the years. The silence when he threw her out. The silence when she lost everything. The silence when he watched her suffer again. And now, as he stood in front of her with all his money and power, it was her silence that cut the deepest. Tobe sat alone in his room, his cane propped against the wall, his fingers digging into the edge of the blanket as tears rolled down his cheeks. For a child who had known silence and shadows since birth, the voice of Chisholm had been his first warmth. Her scent, her lullabies, and the simple taste of bread she fed him each morning had become his anchors in a world of darkness. But now that anchor was gone. The housemaid said nothing when he asked. His nanny said she was a bad woman. And his father? Silent. The worst pain wasn't his blindness. It was the confusion, the sudden loneliness, the disappearance of a voice that made him feel seen. "Auntie Bread," he whispered over and over, rocking gently, praying she'd return. He hadn't eaten since her arrest. Every time food was brought to him, he pushed it away. Nothing tasted the same. He heard footsteps often, nurses checking in, maids tidying, his father walking by with a phone pressed to his ear. But none of those feet paused like hers. She used to kneel beside him, adjust his collar, rub his back, tell him the sky was blue even if he'd never seen it. He missed her stories. He missed her touch. Most of all, he missed the feeling of not being alone. The adults around him were too busy with image and silence. His world had always been small, but Chisholm had expanded it without even trying. Now that world had collapsed again, and he couldn't understand why. Was it something he did? Was he not enough? These thoughts haunted him. And for a child without vision, the absence of the one thing that made him feel visible was like falling into a bottomless hole. Meanwhile, Eve stood in the doorway watching his son crumble. He had just returned from the police station, where Chisholm had refused to speak to him. Her silence had echoed louder than any slap. He wanted to explain, to beg, to undo it all, but how could he? How do you explain years of abandonment, lies, and recent betrayal in one conversation? Tobe turned his head slightly. "Daddy, where is she?" he asked, voice trembling. Eve froze. "She's safe now," he lied gently. But the boy wasn't satisfied. "She didn't come today. She didn't sing today." The bread tasted different. That was when Eve felt his throat tighten. His son hadn't said that much in a single sentence in over a year. It wasn't just love between them, it was blood. He felt it now, deeply. Regret seared through him. What kind of man destroys a woman, loses a child, then allows both to suffer again when fate brings them back together? He had wronged two hearts, and one of them belonged to the only person who had ever loved him for who he was. Nurse Igioma paced her small apartment late into the night, her fingers running nervously along the edge of the DNA report she had duplicated and tucked into an envelope. She couldn't sleep, not after witnessing the storm unravel before her. Chisholm had been released, yes, but only because Eve stormed into the station with legal threats. Yet even after her freedom, Chisholm had said nothing. Her eyes were hollow, her spirit bruised. Igioma felt a guilt she hadn't expected. She had exposed the truth, but truth without justice only deepened pain. The secret she had uncovered weighed on her chest, pressing harder with every hour that passed. Eve had seen the report, but still, nothing had been done publicly. There had been no press release, no apology. Amarachi was still living in that mansion, untouched. And Chisholm? She was back in her shack, hiding from the world. Igioma remembered the first time she saw Chisholm walk into the hospital, offering her blood without hesitation. "I don't know the boy," Chisholm had said, "but if my blood can save him, take it." That moment had stayed with her. She had seen mothers scream over bills, fathers abandon sick kids, even relatives fight over inheritance while patients died. But Chisholm had given without knowing. She had returned day after day, not because of DNA, but because of love. That's what convinced Igioma to run the test. And now, knowing what she knew, she felt a responsibility deeper than duty. She had uncovered the truth. Now she needed to make sure it didn't stay buried. The world had to know who Chisholm was. Not a beggar, not a thief, not a desperate woman, but a mother, strong, patient, and painfully robbed of everything she once had. With trembling hands, Igioma called an old friend who worked at a popular local blog. "I have a story," she said, "but it's dangerous. And it's true." She didn't give names, but she gave details. She sent them scanned copies of the report, with names redacted. "Let people talk," she said. "Let the public start digging." If this doesn't make noise, he'll bury her again. The blogger hesitated, but curiosity outweighed fear. Within 48 hours, headlines began to flood social media. DNA shocker. Billionaire's adopted son may be his real child. Discussions ignited. Speculation spread. Reporters swarmed the hospital. The nurse remained anonymous, but her message was clear. The woman they tried to bury was standing on the truth. And now, that truth had begun to roar. Ease stood in front of the mirror in his study, tying his wristwatch with shaky fingers. He had faced politicians, business sharks, and legal attacks with stoic grace. But today, his hands trembled. The headlines had broken. People were starting to ask questions. The press wanted statements. Amarachi's father had called, furious. "Fix it," he said, "or forget the wedding." But Ease didn't care anymore. The woman he planned to marry had destroyed the only person who ever loved him truly. Amarachi had used him, manipulated him, and worst of all, tried to erase a mother's bond with her child. That morning, Ease didn't call for his driver. He didn't send guards. He simply got into his own car and drove to the small one-room house on the outskirts of ABA Chisholm's home. The place was worse than he remembered. The zinc roof was patched with nylon, the windows were covered with newspaper, and the door hung crooked. Yet inside, he could feel a peace he hadn't known in years. He knocked. There was silence, then a slow creak. Chisholm stood there, still in her faded wrapper, eyes swollen but sharp. Her mother lay coughing weakly on a mat inside. Ease didn't speak for a moment. Then he did something that shocked even himself. He knelt on the dusty ground, in front of the woman he once crushed. "I was wrong," he said. "From the moment you told me you were pregnant, I let pride and lies blind me. I believed everyone but you, and I've never known peace since that day." Chisholm didn't cry. Her arms crossed, her body still. She simply stared down at him, as if weighing the sincerity of his words against the years he had stolen from her. "I didn't even know he was alive," she finally whispered. "They told me I lost him. The pain nearly killed me. I had nothing. And even now, after finding him again, I wasn't the one who discovered the truth. You were." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes never blinked. "You let them drag me like an animal, Ease. You stood by while they humiliated me again." Her words hit him like bullets. "I deserve that," he said. "I deserve worse. But I want to make it right. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I just want to fight for you, for him, for what I destroyed." She looked away for the first time, eyes focused on her mother's shallow breathing. "Don't fight for me," she said finally. "Fight for that little boy who called me light. He's the only reason I haven't given up yet." And with that, she closed the door, softly, not in anger, but in a silence more painful than hate. And Ease? He remained on his knees, the powerful man finally reduced to a father begging for redemption. The air in Chisholm's tiny room was heavy with silence after Ease left. She remained by the door long after closing it, her fingers trembling as she pressed them to the wood, trying to steady her breath. It wasn't just the sight of Ease kneeling that shook her. It was the way his voice cracked, the rawness of his confession, the sorrow in his eyes that made her heart ache. Yet she couldn't afford softness now. Too much had happened. Too much had been lost. She walked back to her mother, whose eyes had fluttered open during the commotion. The frail woman gripped her daughter's wrist weakly. "Is it true," she whispered, "that the child is yours?" Chisholm nodded. A tear slipped down her mother's cheek. "Then why are you crying?" she asked. Chisholm couldn't answer. How could she explain that the most beautiful truth in her life was tangled in the deepest betrayal she had ever known? She sat on the floor beside her mother, thinking back to the day she'd been thrown out of Ease's life. How she had run through the rain, blood seeping between her legs, holding onto her stomach, whispering to her unborn child, "Stay with me, please." She remembered collapsing at the clinic, how the nurses had surrounded her, the chaos, the blurred faces, and then silence. When she awoke, she had been told the child didn't make it. No burial, no body, just a line on a piece of paper. Fetal loss due to stress and trauma. She had wept until her throat was raw, And in the months that followed, she lost her scholarship, her father, and the will to believe in anything good. And now, 7 years later, she finds that not only did her child survive, but had been unknowingly placed in the arms of the very man who cast her away. Life hadn't just broken her. It had mocked her in silence. What tore her apart the most wasn't the injustice. It was the bond she had unknowingly rebuilt with her son. She didn't know Tobe was hers, yet her spirit had. She remembered how his hands felt in hers, the way his voice changed when he laughed, how he clung to her like something familiar. And now it all made sense. She had fed her child with bread while thinking she was feeding a stranger. She had sung to him lullabies from her childhood, not knowing they were his birthright. She had wiped his tears not as a savior, but as a mother. And now, after all the truth had come out, she found herself standing at the edge of two emotions, unbearable joy and unspeakable grief. What did one do with such a scar? A scar formed by lies, but healed by fate? For now, she had no answer. All she knew was that her son was alive, and her silence, once born of defeat, now pulsed with power. The walls of the Naji estate pulsed with tension as Ease stormed into the main living room, the DNA report clutched tightly in his fist. Amarachi sat comfortably on a cream-colored leather couch, flipping through a fashion magazine, her legs crossed in elegance and arrogance. She looked up with a faint smirk, already anticipating the topic. "I heard you paid a visit to the bread seller," she said dryly. "Did she cry and beg for pity like I expected?" But before she could utter another word, Ease flung the report onto the glass table in front of her. "You lied," he said coldly, his voice sharp with betrayal. "You stole my son. You buried the truth. You almost destroyed the only woman who ever truly loved me. And for what? A wedding." Amarachi's face remained composed for a moment, but the color began to drain from her cheeks. She had not expected Ease to find the truth so quickly, nor to confront her so directly. Amarachi leaned back, eyes narrowing. "And what if I did?" she replied. "You're angry now, but let's not pretend. You were ready to destroy your entire life for that girl. I saved your image, Ease. I protected your name, your company, your legacy. While she was running around with a bastard child, I was the one standing by your side." Ease's eyes darkened. "That bastard child is my son," he growled. "And that girl, as you call her, is his mother. And she never lied to me. You and my mother did. You both orchestrated the test results. You both pushed her out. And now I've spent years thinking I adopted a stranger when I was holding my own flesh and blood." His voice cracked. "You robbed me of my fatherhood. You robbed a mother of her child. And now, you sit there acting like you did me a favor." Amarachi's defenses crumbled. She stood up, her voice rising in desperation. "I did it because I love you, Ease. I was afraid of losing you. She was ruining your future, poor, ragged, loud. She would have dragged you down, and your mother knew it too." Ease shook his head, laughter escaping bitterly from his lips. "No, you did it because you loved power, because you wanted the Naji name more than you wanted me. And now, you have neither." He walked to the door and called for security. "Escort Miss Amarachi out of this house. She's no longer welcome here." Amarachi froze. "You're choosing her over me?" Ease turned once more. "I'm choosing truth over lies. I'm choosing my son, and the woman who fed him when no one else would, not knowing he was her own child. That kind of love you'll never understand." As the guards led her out, her cries echoed through the halls. But Ease didn't look back. Some doors had to close permanently for healing to begin. Amarachi's heels echoed sharply across the polished marble floors as the guards escorted her toward the gate. Her once proud posture now sagged beneath the weight of humiliation and rage. The mansion, once her playground of control, now felt cold and distant. The staff she had once bullied avoided her gaze. The maids whispered from behind kitchen doors. Even the driver who had once rushed to open her car door stood stiffly, refusing to help her carry her bags. She tried to hold her head high, but the sting in her chest wouldn't let her breathe. As the heavy black gates opened, she turned back one last time, hoping, praying, that Ease would come running. that he'd say it was all a mistake. But he didn't. The gates shut behind her with a finality that echoed louder than words. The press caught wind of her exit before she reached the car. Microphones shoved into her face, cameras flashed, and questions rained down like bullets. Amarachi, is it true you tampered with the DNA results? Were you involved in the mother's arrest? Is the wedding officially canceled? She forced a smile, pretending grace, but her hands trembled as she waved them off. No comment, she muttered, sliding into her car, windows up, heartbeat loud. As the vehicle pulled away, her eyes burned with bitterness. She thought of everything she had done to secure her place. How many lies, how many schemes. And now it had all unraveled because of a woman with nothing but bread and a song. A woman who had become the symbol of truth, while she had become the villain. The public's pity now belonged to Chisholm. And Amarachi? She was just another scandal waiting to be forgotten. Back inside the mansion, Eve stood alone in the living room, staring at the empty spot where Amarachi had sat just hours ago. He exhaled deeply, feeling a strange mix of relief and grief. He had made the right decision, but it didn't erase the wreckage. He walked toward Tobe's room and found the boy curled in a blanket, humming softly to himself. Eve sat beside him and gently placed a hand on his back. "She's gone," he whispered. "And I know I've made many mistakes, Tobe. But I want to be better for you, and for your mother." The boy turned, blinking blindly toward his father. "Will Auntie Bread come back?" Eve smiled faintly, tears in his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "And this time I won't let her go." Eve returned to Chisholm's neighborhood a second time, not in the shadows of guilt, but in the clear light of morning, determined to face her as a man, without the mask of power, wealth, or entitlement. He arrived without guards or fanfare, holding a bag of groceries in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. An apology letter he had rewritten more than 20 times. Her door was slightly ajar, and the sound of quiet conversation floated out. He hesitated. In all his years, no business deal, political negotiation, or media scandal had humbled him like this moment. When Chisholm appeared at the doorway, her eyes registered surprise, then cool restraint. She stepped outside without a word, leaving the door halfway open. Eve handed her the letter with trembling hands and whispered, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but please read this." Chisholm looked down at the envelope without touching it. "Is this another contract?" she asked flatly, her voice quiet but heavy. "Or a check to buy back your conscience?" Her words were not cruel, they were honest, and they cut him more deeply than any slap. Eve shook his head. "It's everything I should have said years ago, and everything I should have done weeks ago when I watched you suffer in silence." She still didn't reach for it, but her expression softened slightly. He continued, "You gave that boy love before you knew he was yours. You gave him laughter, safety, and bread you could barely afford. What did I give him? Staff, nannies, emptiness. I thought money was enough, but he found joy in your voice." Chisholm blinked, fighting the surge of tears threatening to rise. "You didn't just hurt me, Eve. You hurt him. He called for me. He cried for me. And you stood still." He dropped to his knees, placing the groceries by the wall, and resting his hands together like a broken man seeking mercy. "I'm not here to beg for love," he said. "I'm here to ask for a chance to do right by both of you. I failed as a man, as a father. I didn't protect you when I should have. I let pride and influence drown the truth. I let silence become my defense. But I swear to you, whatever you need now, whatever justice, healing, or peace you seek, I will not be silent again." For a long time, Chisholm said nothing. Then finally, she reached down and picked up the envelope. "This doesn't fix what was done," she said, "but maybe it opens a door that should have never been closed." And with that, she walked back into her home, leaving the door open behind her for the first time. It had been 3 days since Chisholm agreed to visit the estate, not to reconcile, but to spend time with Tobe. Eve had arranged for everything to be quiet and respectful. No staff were allowed in the room except the nurse, and Amarachi's presence had been fully erased from the household. When Chisholm entered the mansion again, it felt surreal. The same walls that once witnessed her fall from grace were now welcoming her silently. But her focus was not on the grandeur. It was on the child waiting in the next room. As she stepped in, her heart clenched. Tobe sat on the bed, his eyes bandaged post-surgery, his hands fidgeting nervously. The doctors had said there was a high chance of partial vision recovery. And today, they were removing the bandages. Tobe's tiny voice trembled. "Auntie Bread." Chisholm rushed to him and held his hand. "I'm here, my love," she said softly. The doctors began to unravel the bandages. Tobe winced slightly, but remained still. The room was silent. Ease stood by the window, barely breathing. When the final layer came off, Tobe blinked rapidly. His eyes, once clouded with fog, now gleamed with a dim but growing awareness. The light hurt him at first, but gradually he focused. He looked around, confused. And then he saw her. His tiny hand reached out trembling, and he touched her face gently. "You look like the voice I love," he whispered. "Are you the light?" Chisholm burst into tears and pulled him into her chest. "I am, baby. I've always been." The boy sobbed quietly, holding her tightly, as if fearing she would disappear. Ease turned away, his chest rising with emotion. The moment was too sacred to interrupt. Tobe had regained more than sight. He had found his mother in full clarity. That hug, that reunion, was worth more than all the fortunes Ease had ever built. Chisholm remained seated beside the boy long after the doctor left. They spoke in whispers, her fingers braiding a small lock of his hair, his hands brushing against her cheeks. "I prayed you'd come back," he said. "When I couldn't see, I still saw you in my heart." She smiled through tears. "You found me even when the world tried to hide you." That night, Tobe didn't want to sleep without her beside him. And for the first time since she gave birth, Chisholm slept with her son in her arms, holding the very light she thought she lost forever. Weeks passed, and the public storm had shifted. The story had gone viral, but this time in Chisholm's favor. Journalists who once labeled her a criminal now praised her strength and story. Interviews were requested, features planned, documentaries pitched. But Chisholm declined them all. "I don't want to be famous," she told Ease. "I just want peace and a life for my son." And so quietly, with no press conference or flashy announcement, Ease transferred ownership of one of his smaller bakery subsidiaries to Chisholm. She renamed it Bread of Second Chances, not out of pride, but as a symbol, a tribute to the bread that once cost her everything, and the love that brought everything back. At the launch, she wore a simple white dress. Her mother, healthier now, with better care, sat in the front row with a quiet smile. Tobe stood beside Chisholm, helping her cut the ribbon. "This place is for you," she whispered to him, "so that when you grow up, you'll know that love is louder than lies, and kindness is never wasted." The bakery wasn't grand, but it was filled with warmth. She hired other single mothers, women who had been abandoned, women who needed a new beginning. The smell of fresh bread and hope wafted through the air. Customers came not just for food, but for healing. It became a sanctuary, not just for Chisholm, but for many others who carried invisible scars. Ease came quietly one afternoon, wearing a casual shirt and jeans, his usual pride left behind. He bought a loaf, handed her the money, and said, "Thank you for allowing me to be part of his world." Chisholm looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You're not buying bread today," she said. "You're buying your place back in your son's life, and I pray you handle it better this time." He nodded solemnly. "I will." And as he walked out, Tobe ran after him, grabbing his hand. "Daddy, can we come back here tomorrow?" Ease knelt and kissed his forehead. "We'll come every day if you want." And with that, the three walked back into the bakery, mother, father, and son, not as a perfect family, but as three souls stitched back together by pain, truth, and bread. Chisholm stood by the large window of her bakery one quiet evening, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in warm orange hues. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, wrapping around her like a familiar embrace. Behind her, staff laughed and packed the day's final orders, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes of betrayal, and though she still carried the scars, she wore them with quiet strength. Tobe sat at a corner table drawing shapes on a notepad with crayons, occasionally looking up to flash his mother a proud smile. Beside him, Ease helped him spell simple words. It was a scene that, just months ago, would have seemed impossible. A broken family sitting together, not whole in the traditional sense, but healing in ways the world could never see. Ease was no longer the untouchable billionaire she once feared. He had stepped back from public life, redirected his wealth into supporting underprivileged mothers, and visited the bakery daily, not out of obligation, but out of a newfound reverence. He didn't ask Chisholm to marry him again. He didn't try to reclaim her as a lover. Instead, he respected her space, understanding that forgiveness wasn't a right, it was a mercy, and one he had to earn every day. He helped with deliveries, cleaned tables, and even fixed broken shelves. He became a father, truly, for the first time. And though Chisholm didn't say much about it, her heart noticed. Every act of humility, every gentle word to their son, every moment of silence where once there had been pride, it all began to sow seeds of trust again. One evening, as they closed the shop together, Ease stayed behind while Chisholm counted the day's sales. He walked up to her, hands tucked nervously into his pockets, and said softly, "You forgave me long before I asked, didn't you?" She paused, looked at him, and then down at her hands. "Forgiveness isn't something I gave you," she replied. "It's something I gave myself, so I could sleep at night, so I could raise our son without hate." Ease's eyes moistened. "Thank you for not raising him to hate me." She smiled faintly. "I didn't need to. Life already taught him what absence feels like. Your presence now, that's what matters. But don't mistake peace for restoration. I can forgive and still not go back to what once broke me." Ease nodded, deeply moved. "Then I'll stay here, not for the past, but for whatever future you allow me to be part of." And in that moment, there was no kiss, no dramatic music, no grand gesture. Just a quiet understanding between two people forever linked by love, loss, and a boy who helped them both see clearly again. The one-year anniversary of Bread of Second Chances brought the entire community to life. Banners lined the streets, music filled the air, and the scent of cinnamon rolls and freshly baked Ajij bread wafted into every corner of the neighborhood. But it wasn't just a celebration of business success. It was a celebration of redemption. Women came from different parts of the country to see the bakery, founded by a woman who once sold bread barefoot under the sun. News stations now spoke her name with admiration, no longer scandal. Young girls looked up to her. Broken women found healing through her story. She had become a symbol of dignity that refused to die, a reminder that even the most shattered life could become a lighthouse for others. A small stage was set outside the bakery, where Chisholm was to speak. She stood in a simple Ankara gown, her hair tied back, no jewelry except for a bracelet Tobe had made from beads. As the crowd fell silent, she stepped forward, eyes scanning the familiar faces. Her staff, her mother in the front row, Ease beside their son. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't need one. Her voice was steady. "A year ago, I was arrested for feeding a boy who cried in the dark. That boy turned out to be my son. And the man who once threw me away is now the man who helps me serve bread every morning." Life has a way of teaching us that no pain is wasted. Every insult, every betrayal, every lonely night, they weren't curses. They were lessons. And today I thank God for all of them. The crowd erupted in applause, many with tears in their eyes. After the speech, Tobe ran to her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're my hero," he whispered. She kissed his forehead. "You are mine, my son. You always were." Ease joined them quietly, standing at her side without saying a word, his presence a silent promise. Chisholm looked out over the crowd once more. She saw strangers clapping. She saw women wiping their eyes. She even saw a group of former classmates, those who once mocked her in the market, now standing proudly in support. Her heart swelled. She had been the woman mocked, shamed, discarded. But now she was a voice, a mother, a builder of second chances. And though she may never wear a crown or walk red carpets, she had found something greater. Honor born from pain, peace born from truth, and a future built from bread and love. The story the world once tried to bury had risen, and it now fed others. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.